on around September the 11th. The U.S. economy is being looted. Anybody here remember the savings and loan scandal? You know, the gang that's in the White House is the same gang that brought us the savings and loan scandal? That took $500 billion out of your pockets. Well, here's some new developments in the government. And by the way, I'm not a Democrat or a Republican. Bill Clinton's a sleazebag too. Okay? That so-called liberal put almost a million nonviolent drug offenders in prison to boost the shares of companies like Corrections Corporation of America and Wackenhut. He destroyed many of the welfare laws, and one is not better than the other. But notice this: HUD loses, Housing and Urban Development, $59 billion. When was the last time you lost $59 billion? This was from testimony in Congress by Susan Gaffney, Inspector General of HUD. And you know what HUD said they did when they couldn't figure out where the money went? We made an adjustment in our checkbook. Where's that money going? You'll find out before we're through. Now, if you thought that was bad, the Defense Department cannot account for $1.1 trillion that seems to have vanished within the tangled system of financial accounting put in place by private contractors. You know who the private contractors are? Lockheed Martin and DynCorp. Okay? HUD. Oh, I dropped the microphone. I have more microphones on me than the FBI has in my living room. This is from a very great reporter, a very courageous woman who had served on Capitol Hill for many years and became an investigative reporter named Kelly O'Meara, who writes for the Washington Times Insight magazine. I know it's owned by Moon, but Kelly does fabulous work, and she's written a great piece on civil rights after the September 11th attack. The point is that $4.4 trillion in adjustments to the Pentagon books had to be cooked to compile the required financial statements, and that $1.1 trillion of that amount could not be supported by any reliable information. All right, now, there's one thing I got to do before we get to September the 11th and what's happening since. It's easy to say that this is a war about oil, and you're going to know more about it than you did when you came in here when you leave. The entire world economy is on the brink of a major collapse. 2 days before the attacks on the World Trade Center, I issued an emergency bulletin to all of my subscribers. And by the way, there's a table over here, and those of you who would like to subscribe, we have the information there for you. I'll put a website up. We also have videotapes of a lecture on Wall Street's War for Drug Money, which is like 2 hours on what I did with the economy that I gave at the USC School of International Relations last December. And we have those tapes over there. I think Chris Milligan's over there somewhere. Chris, wherever you are. But I issued a bulletin saying that we were on the brink of an economic collapse that would make 1929 look like a picnic. And in the 3 weeks prior to the attacks, the Dow had dropped almost 900 points. Now, what we have seen since then, and you must understand this clearly, is that the Dow's so-called resurrection to close to 10,000 points is strictly the result of a massive infusion of cash from the U.S. Treasury, which is your cash, which is being given to the corporate executives and not to the people who have been laid off. And every time you see the Dow go up, you'd better believe that another 10,000 people have lost their jobs.
We are also in a global financial crisis that began in 1998 with the collapse of the bond markets and hedge fund derivatives, the money laundering investigations, and the mega mergers in the financial industry. The war buildup after September 11th is now shifting resources from domestic needs to the defense establishment. This fulfills a Bush-Cheney campaign promise to boost defense spending.
But it is not sustainable for a number of reasons. And then this brings us into the issue of oil briefly, and we'll get into this more later. And basically is that oil production in the world is peaking. The last untapped major oil fields in the world are in two places, actually. First, Central Asia, and we'll get into that in depth. And second, guess where? In Colombia. Okay? And this is now a war, and this is now a moment in human history when the age of oil is nearing its end.